Hell's Angel found a little girl chained to a tree. What he did next will make you cry. The rumble of the Harley-Davidson echoed through the forest as the sun began its descent behind the pine trees. The golden light filtered through branches, casting long shadows across the winding road. Jack Harmon, a 45-year-old Hell's Angel with weathered features and arms covered in faded tattoos, leaned into a gentle curve, his leather vest bearing the patches that told the story of 20 years with the club. The forest road stretched before him, empty and peaceful. This was his favorite time to ride, when the world grew quiet and the day's heat gave way to the cool evening air. Out here, there was no one to impress, no reputation to maintain. Just a man, his motorcycle, and the open road. Jack's grip tightened on the handlebars as memories flickered through his mind like the patches of sunlight between the trees. 25 years had passed since he'd first climbed onto a motorcycle, seeking freedom from a life that felt too small, too ordinary. The club had given him brotherhood when he needed it most, but it had taken things from him too. "Should have done better by you, Sarah," he muttered beneath his helmet, his voice lost in the engine's growl. His ex-wife's face appeared in his mind, younger then, hopeful, before disappointment had hardened her features. Their marriage had lasted 6 years before she'd finally had enough of the late nights, the dangerous business, and his inability to leave the life behind. "You love that bike more than you ever loved me," she'd said on that final night, her suitcase already packed. Maybe she'd been right. Jack eased off the throttle as the road narrowed, allowing himself to feel the weight of his solitude. The club was family. His brothers would take a bullet for him, and he for them. But at the end of each day, he returned to an empty apartment above a motorcycle repair shop, in a town where most people crossed the street when they saw him coming. The dying sunlight glinted off his chrome handlebars as he navigated a particularly tight bend. His shadow stretched long beside him, like a darker version of himself racing alongside. Sometimes Jack wondered which was more real, the man or the shadow, the person or the reputation. A deer bounded across the road 50 yards ahead, startling him from his thoughts. Jack slowed, watching as the animal disappeared into the undergrowth. Life out here continued undisturbed, unconcerned with human troubles. There was something comforting in that. The forest grew denser as the road climbed slightly uphill. Jack had traveled this route dozens of times over the years when he needed to clear his head. Something about the isolation spoke to him, reminded him that beneath the leather and patches, he was still just a man trying to make sense of his choices. He thought of Tommy, the young prospect who'd joined the club last month. Eager, idealistic, reminded Jack of himself 20 years ago, before he understood the true price of the patch. Yesterday, he'd caught himself wanting to warn the kid, to tell him to turn back while he still could. But who was he to judge another man's path? His own had brought him here, alone on a forest road at sunset, filled with regrets he couldn't name. The bike's engine hummed steadily as Jack crested the hill. The valley spread out before him, bathed in the day's fading light. In moments like these, he could almost believe in something greater than himself, something that might offer redemption for a life lived on the edges. As he descended into the valley, the shadows lengthened. The temperature dropped noticeably, and Jack shivered despite his leather jacket. He'd need to find somewhere to stop for the night soon. There was a small motel about 30 miles ahead, where he sometimes stayed. The owner never asked questions, and didn't mind his late arrivals. Jack rounded another bend, slowing slightly as the road narrowed further. That's when something caught his eye. A slight movement off to the right side of the road, near the base of a large oak tree. It was subtle, almost imperceptible in the growing darkness. He eased off the throttle, the bike's rumble quieting to a low growl. Most likely an animal, he thought. But something about the movement didn't seem right for wildlife. Too deliberate. Too small. Jack guided his motorcycle to the side of the road and killed the engine. In the sudden silence, the forest sounds emerged. Birds settling for the night, the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. He removed his helmet and hung it from the handlebar, his eyes never leaving the spot where he'd seen the movement. There, again. A slight shifting near the base of the tree, partially hidden by tall grass and fallen branches. Cautiously, Jack swung his leg over his bike and stepped onto the gravel shoulder, his heavy boots crunching softly as he moved toward the mysterious movement in the gathering dusk. Jack moved cautiously towards the tree, his instincts on high alert. 20 years with the club had taught him to approach unknown situations with care. The forest had grown darker, shadows stretching between the trees like long fingers. Something about this didn't feel right. "Hello?" he called out, his deep voice cutting through the evening quiet. No response came. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flashlight he always carried. Its beam cut through the growing darkness, illuminating patches of forest floor as he approached. The light caught something metallic near the base of the large oak tree, something that definitely wasn't natural. "What the hell?" Jack muttered, moving closer. The beam of light finally revealed what had caught his attention, and Jack felt his heart drop into his stomach. A small girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, sat huddled against the tree trunk. Her wrists were bound with a heavy chain that wrapped around the tree, securing her in place. Her face was dirty, streaked with tears and grime, and her clothes were torn and filthy. Dark hair hung in tangles around her thin face. "Jesus Christ," Jack breathed, immediately kneeling down. The girl flinched away from him, her eyes barely opening at his approach. She was conscious, but just barely. Hey, it's okay," he said, softening his voice as much as he could. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl made no response, her head lolling slightly to one side. Jack could see bruises on her arms, dirt under her fingernails, and dried blood on her lip. Someone had hurt this child badly and left her here to die. Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a burning rage coupled with overwhelming protectiveness. In his time with the club, he'd seen plenty of ugly things, but this crossed a line that even the roughest bikers he knew wouldn't touch. You didn't hurt kids, ever. "I'm going to get you out of here, okay?" he said gently, though he wasn't sure if she could understand him in her condition. "My name's Jack. Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered slightly, the only indication she was still conscious. Jack carefully examined the chain. It was secured with a padlock, solid, but nothing he couldn't handle with the right tools. "I'll be right back," he told her. "I'm just going to my bike to get some tools. I'm not leaving you." Jack rushed back to his Harley, his mind racing. Who would do this to a child? How long had she been out here? He dug into the saddlebags on his motorcycle, finding his tool set, something no biker traveled without. Returning to the girl, he knelt beside her again. "I'm going to break this chain, and then we're getting you somewhere safe," he explained, keeping his voice steady and calm despite the fury building inside him. Jack worked quickly, using a pair of bolt cutters to attack the weakest link in the chain. The metal was stubborn, but Jack was stronger. Fueled by determination and anger, the chain finally gave way with a satisfying snap. The girl's arms fell limply to her sides, the broken chain still attached to her small wrists. She was so weak she couldn't even hold herself upright. As she started to slump forward, Jack caught her gently. "It's okay, I've got you," he said, carefully examining her for any immediate injuries that might make moving her dangerous. She was dehydrated and exhausted, but nothing appeared to be broken. The evening had grown cold, and the girl was wearing only a thin t-shirt and jeans. Jack shrugged out of his leather jacket, the one bearing his club patches and colors, and wrapped it around her tiny frame. It swallowed her completely, but would keep her warm. "I'm going to pick you up now," he said softly. "We're getting out of here." With gentle movements that belied his rough exterior, Jack lifted the girl into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, a fact that only fueled his anger at whoever had done this to her. She didn't resist or struggle. She simply didn't have the strength. Her head rested against his chest as he carried her carefully through the trees back toward his motorcycle. The contrast wasn't lost on him. This massive Hell's Angel with tattoos and a reputation that made grown men step aside, now cradling a helpless child as if she were made of glass. As he reached his bike, Jack looked down at the girl in his arms and made a silent promise. Whoever had done this would pay, but first, this child needed help. Jack stood beside his motorcycle, the small girl bundled in his leather jacket. He faced a dilemma. He couldn't exactly strap her into a sidecar. His Harley didn't have one, and he couldn't leave her here while he went for help. "All right, little one," he murmured. "We're going to have to ride together." He climbed onto his bike first, then carefully positioned the girl in front of him. She was so light, so fragile in his massive arms. Jack arranged her so she sat sideways across the seat, her head against his chest, his left arm holding her securely while his right hand controlled the throttle. "I've got you," he promised, as he kicked the Harley to life. The engine's rumble seemed to stir something in the girl. Her eyelids fluttered briefly. "That's good," Jack encouraged. "Stay with me now." He eased the motorcycle back onto the road, moving slowly at first to ensure she was secure. The night had fully descended, the road ahead illuminated only by his headlight. Stars peeked through gaps in the forest canopy overhead, silent witnesses to this unexpected rescue. "My name's Jack," he said, speaking loudly enough to be heard over the engine but keeping his voice gentle. "Been riding motorcycles since before you were born." He kept talking, instinctively knowing he needed to keep her conscious. "This old bike's been with me through a lot. She's loud, but she's reliable." The girl's breathing remained shallow, but he felt her stir slightly when he hit a rough patch of road. "Sorry about that," he said. "Not the smoothest ride, but we'll get you somewhere safe soon." Jack had been headed back to his own place, a small cabin outside town where he lived alone. But that wouldn't work now. The girl needed medical attention, and he wasn't equipped to provide it. The nearest hospital was 30 miles away, and something in his gut told him taking her there might create more problems than it solved. If someone had done this to her, they might be looking for her. No, he needed somewhere closer, somewhere safe, somewhere with people he trusted. "We're heading to a place where some friends of mine stay sometimes," he explained to the barely conscious child. "It's not fancy, but it's warm and safe. Nobody will hurt you there, I promise." The safe house was something the club maintained, a simple structure on the outskirts of town where members could lie low if needed. It wasn't used often these days, but it was stocked with basic supplies and had a first aid kit. More importantly, it was private. As they rode through the darkness, Jack kept talking, telling her about the constellations visible through the tree breaks, describing the forest animals that were probably watching them pass, even humming snatches of old rock songs, anything to maintain that thin connection to consciousness. "Stay with me, little one," he urged when he felt her growing heavier against him. "Not much further now." The night had grown colder, and Jack hunched his body around the girl, trying to shield her from the wind. His jacket covered most of her, but her small face was exposed to the elements. He rode faster than was strictly safe given his precious cargo, but each labored breath from the child increased his urgency. Finally, the turnoff appeared. an unmarked gravel road barely visible in the darkness. Jack slowed the bike, navigating carefully over the uneven surface. After about half a mile, a small cabin came into view, nestled among the trees. "Here we are," Jack said, relief evident in his voice. "Told you we'd make it." He brought the motorcycle to a stop in front of the cabin and cut the engine. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the ping of the cooling metal and the distant hooting of an owl. With practiced ease, Jack dismounted while keeping the girl secure in his arms. She seemed even smaller now, bundled in his jacket, her face pale in the moonlight. Jack's heart tightened at the sight of dried tears tracking through the dirt on her cheeks. He carried her up the 3 wooden steps to the cabin's porch, fishing in his pocket for the key he knew would be there. Every club member carried one. That was the rule. The lock clicked open, and Jack shouldered his way inside. The cabin was dark and cool, but not uncomfortable. Jack reached for the light switch with his elbow, illuminating the simple interior. A main room with a couch and kitchenette, 2 doors leading to small bedrooms, and a basic bathroom. "See? Not much, but it'll do," he said softly to the girl as he carried her toward the couch. Jack gently laid the girl on the worn leather couch. In the cabin's light, her injuries looked worse than he'd first thought. Dried blood caked her wrists where the chains had cut into her skin. Bruises in various shades of purple and yellow mapped a history of abuse across her thin arms. Her face was smudged with dirt, tear tracks cutting clean lines down her cheeks. "Let's get you fixed up," he said softly. He moved to the small bathroom and gathered supplies: a clean washcloth, a bowl of warm water, antiseptic, and bandages from the first aid kit mounted on the wall. The kit was well stocked. Club rules. You never knew when someone might need patching up. Back at the couch, Jack set everything down on the coffee table. The girl's eyes were open now, watching his every move. They were deep brown and filled with a wariness that broke his heart. "I'm going to clean those cuts, okay?" he explained, his gruff voice gentler than it had been in years. "Might sting a bit, but we need to get them clean." She didn't respond, but she didn't pull away either when he carefully took her small hand in his massive one. Jack dipped the washcloth in warm water and began to clean the dirt and blood from her wrist. She winced, but remained silent. "You're brave," he noted, working methodically. "Braver than some grown men I know." He cleaned both wrists, applied antiseptic, and wrapped them in clean bandages. Next, he dampened a fresh corner of the cloth and carefully wiped her face, removing the layers of dirt and tears. Beneath the grime was a young face, maybe 6 or 7 years old, he guessed, with a small button nose and a dusting of freckles across her cheeks. "There you are," Jack said when her face was clean. "Bet that feels better." A flicker of something, maybe relief, crossed her face, but she remained silent. "You must be hungry," he realized, mentally cataloging what might be in the safe-house kitchen. The cabinets yielded some basics: crackers, canned soup, coffee. Jack heated the soup on the small stove, while keeping the girl in his line of sight. She hadn't moved from the couch, her eyes tracking him like he might disappear, or worse, turn on her at any moment. "It's just chicken noodle," he said, bringing over a mug filled with soup. "Nothing fancy." He sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. "Can you hold this? It's not too hot." Her hands trembled as she took the mug, and Jack steadied it with his own hand. "Small sips," he advised. "No rush." She took a tentative sip, then another. Jack smiled as some color returned to her pale face. "That's it. Good job." When the soup proved too much for her to finish, Jack set it aside and offered a cracker instead. She took it with fingers that still shook slightly and nibbled at the edges. "Listen," Jack said, keeping his voice low and even. "I know you're scared. You've got every right to be. But you're safe here. Nobody knows about this place except people I trust. And I'm not going anywhere." The girl watched him, eyes wide and uncertain. "Do you have a name?" he asked gently. She looked down at her bandaged wrists, then back at him. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. "That's okay," Jack assured her. "You don't have to talk until you're ready." He noticed her eyelids growing heavy, the adrenaline that had kept her alert finally wearing off. Jack found a blanket in one of the bedrooms and brought it back. "You should rest," he said, draping it over her. "I'll be right here." The girl's eyes darted around the room, fear returning. "I promise," Jack said, understanding her worry. "I'm not leaving." To prove his point, he settled into the armchair next to the couch. The girl watched him for a long moment, then slowly extended her small hand toward him. Jack hesitated, then carefully took it in his own. Her fingers curled around his thumb, such a small hand against his weathered one. The contrast wasn't lost on Jack. How long had it been since anyone had reached for him like this? Since anyone had trusted him? The girl's breathing gradually slowed and deepened as she drifted toward sleep, but her grip on his hand remained firm. Even in sleep, she was afraid to let go. Jack watched as her face relaxed, the worry lines smoothing out. She looked peaceful now, the fear temporarily banished by exhaustion. Outside, the night deepened. Jack sat motionless, his hand holding hers, a silent guardian through the dark hours. His mind raced with questions. Who had done this to her? Who was missing her? What would he do when morning came? But for now, those questions could wait. For now, his only job was to keep her safe, to be the protection she so desperately needed. The first rays of dawn filtered through the dusty blinds, casting golden strips across the safe-house floor. Jack hadn't moved much during the night, dozing in short bursts while maintaining his vigil. His back ached from sitting upright in the armchair, but he didn't regret it. The girl had slept soundly, her small hand still clutching his. As morning light filled the room, the girl's eyelids fluttered. She blinked slowly, confusion washing over her face as she took in unfamiliar surroundings. For a moment, panic flashed in her eyes. Then they found Jack's face, and recognition dawned. "Morning," he said quietly, his voice raspy from disuse. She didn't respond, but didn't pull her hand away either. Jack counted that as progress. "Slept okay?" he asked. The girl gave a tiny nod, so slight he almost missed it. It was the first response she'd given him, and it felt like a victory. Jack carefully extracted his hand from hers. "I'm going to make us some breakfast. Nothing fancy, but better than nothing." He stood, stretching his stiff muscles, and moved to the kitchenette. The girl's eyes followed him, wary, but less frightened than before. Jack rummaged through the cabinets, finding instant oatmeal packets and a can of peaches. It wasn't much, but it would do. "Hope you like oatmeal," he said over his shoulder while heating water on the small stove. The girl sat up slowly, wincing as she moved. The blanket fell away, revealing more bruises on her arms than Jack had noticed the night before. His jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. No use scaring her with his anger at whoever had hurt her. He brought over a bowl of oatmeal with peach slices on top and a plastic spoon. "Careful, it's warm." She took the bowl with both hands, looking at the food with uncertain eyes. "Go ahead," he encouraged. "You need to eat." She took a small bite, then another. Jack nodded approvingly and sat back in his chair with his own bowl. They ate in companionable silence, the girl growing more comfortable with each passing minute. When she'd finished, Jack took her bowl and set it aside. Better? The girl nodded again, this time more definitively. Those bandages need changing, he said, reaching for the first aid kit he'd left on the coffee table. He worked methodically, unwrapping the old bandages to reveal raw skin beneath. The cuts weren't as deep as he'd feared, but they still made his stomach turn. What kind of monster chains up a child? As he applied fresh antiseptic, the girl watched his hands, large, calloused, covered in faded tattoos, as they moved with surprising gentleness. When he finished wrapping new bandages, she touched one with her fingertip, then looked up at him. Better? Jack asked. The smallest hint of a smile flickered across her face. Outside, birds chirped in the trees surrounding the cabin. The morning was peaceful, almost deceptively so, given the circumstances that had brought them here. I'm Jack, he said suddenly, feeling she should know his name. What's yours? The girl's lips pressed together, her eyes dropping to her lap. It's okay if you don't want to tell me, he added quickly. No rush. She looked up again, studying his face as if trying to read his intentions. Then, so quietly he had to lean forward to hear, she whispered, Lily. Jack's heart swelled. Lily. That's a real pretty name. Her eyes widened, perhaps surprised by his reaction, or maybe just at hearing her own name spoken kindly. Jack didn't push for more. He stood and walked to the window, checking the surroundings out of habit. The cabin was well hidden, the dirt access road visible only from certain angles. No signs of anyone approaching. When he turned back, Lily was watching him with those solemn eyes. We're safe here, he assured her. Lily pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Mommy, she whispered suddenly, the word catching in her throat. Jack returned to his seat, moving slowly. Your mom? Do you know where she is? Lily's eyes filled with tears. Home, she said, her voice trembling. With him. With who, Lily? Jack asked gently, her small shoulders hunched inward, making herself even smaller. Bad man? She whispered, fear evident in every syllable. Not my daddy. Bad man. Jack's hands curled into fists, but he kept his voice calm. Your stepdad? Lily nodded, a tear escaping down her cheek. He hurts Mommy, hurts me. Her words came in fragmented whispers, as though each one cost her tremendous effort. Chains for being bad. Said I saw things, not supposed to. Jack stepped outside onto the small wooden porch, phone in hand. The morning air was crisp, and dew still clung to the tall grass surrounding the safe house. He glanced back through the window at Lily, who sat wrapped in a blanket, watching him with cautious eyes. He gave her a reassuring nod before turning away. He dialed a number from memory, listening to it ring 3 times before a gruff voice answered. Yeah? Hank, it's Jack. He kept his voice low. I'm at the cabin. Need some help? There was a pause. Trouble? Not exactly. Jack ran a hand through his gray, streaked hair. Found someone who needs protection. Can't explain over the phone. The cabin off Route 16? Hank asked, instantly alert. Yeah, bring Doc if you can find him. On it. Hour, tops. The call ended, and Jack made 2 more, similarly brief. Each brother asked few questions. That was their way. When one of them called, they came. Questions could wait. Jack returned inside to find Lily exactly where he'd left her, her eyes never having left the door. She visibly relaxed when he reappeared. Some friends of mine are coming, he explained, sitting across from her. Good people. They'll help us figure this out. Uncertainty flashed across her face. They look scary, Jack admitted with a small smile. But they're okay. I promise. He spent the next hour moving around the cabin, straightening things up, finding clean clothes for Lily from a forgotten duffel bag in a closet, probably left by someone's girlfriend months ago. The clothes were too big, but better than what she had. Just after 10 o'clock, the rumble of motorcycles approached. One, then two more. Jack saw Lily tense at the sound. "It's okay," he assured her. "Just my friends." The engines cut off, and boots crunched on gravel. Jack stepped onto the porch as three men approached. Hank, a bear of a man with a silver beard. Doc, leaner and older with wire-rimmed glasses incongruous with his leather vest. And Rudy, the youngest at 40, with tattooed arms and a perpetual scowl. "Brother," Hank said, clasping Jack's hand firmly. His eyes searched Jack's face. "What's going on?" Before Jack could answer, Doc spoke up. "You hurt? Someone after you?" Jack shook his head. "Not me. Come inside, but take it easy." The three men exchanged glances but followed Jack through the door. They stopped short when they saw the small figure on the couch. Lily shrank back, her eyes wide with fear at the sight of three more imposing bikers. "What the hell, Jack?" Hank whispered, his bushy eyebrows shooting up. "Found her chained to a tree off Highway 9 last night," Jack explained quietly. "Beaten up, scared half to death." Doc immediately moved forward, his demeanor shifting. Despite his rough appearance, he'd been an Army medic years ago. "Hey there," he said to Lily, his voice gentler than any of them had heard in a long time. "Mind if I take a look at those bandages?" Lily looked at Jack, who nodded encouragingly. "Jack did okay," Doc said after examining her wounds, "but I've got better supplies in my saddlebag." While Doc tended to Lily, Jack pulled Hank and Rudy to the kitchenette. "Who did this?" Rudy growled, keeping his voice low. "Stepfather, from what she said. Sounds like he's hurting her mother, too." Hank's expression darkened. "Chained to a tree? Jesus!" "She hasn't said much, but enough to know she needs help." Jack glanced over at Lily, who was watching them while Doc carefully applied fresh bandages. "She saw something she wasn't supposed to, I think." Two more motorcycles rumbled up outside. Minutes later, Thomas and Big Pete joined them, reacting with the same surprise at finding a child in their safe house. As Doc finished, the men gathered in a loose circle, keeping their distance from Lily to avoid overwhelming her. "So what's the plan?" Big Pete asked, his voice surprisingly soft for a man of his size. Jack looked at each of his brothers. "She needs protection, and we need to find out who did this." "You're talking about taking on someone else's fight," Thomas pointed out. "The club has to agree." "Look at her," Jack said simply. They did. The little girl sat with her knees pulled up to her chest, making herself as small as possible. The bruises on her arms stood in stark contrast to her pale skin. Hank was the first to nod. "I'm in." "Me too," Doc said. One by one, each man agreed. Even Rudy, the most cautious about club involvement, gave a curt nod. "We protect our own," Big Pete said, echoing their unwritten code. "She's not one of ours," Thomas felt compelled to point out. Jack's expression hardened. "She is now." The men looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. They were Hell's Angels, feared by many, misunderstood by most. But they lived by a code, and that code included standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. "Whatever you need, brother," Hank said, clapping Jack on the shoulder. "We'll find who hurt her." The afternoon sun streamed through the dusty windows of the safe house, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Jack sat at the small kitchen table, watching as Doc finished checking Lily's injuries one last time. "She's doing better than I'd expect," Doc said quietly, packing up his medical supplies. "Kids are resilient, but still—" He shook his head, unable to finish the thought. The other club members had spread out around the cabin, some outside keeping watch, others making calls to gather information. They moved with purpose, their usual rowdiness replaced by a focused determination that came whenever one of their own was threatened. And somehow, in the span of less than a day, this small girl had become one of their own. Jack opened the refrigerator, surveying its meager contents. A loaf of bread, some cheese, half a carton of eggs, and a few cans of soup. It would have to do. "You hungry?" he asked Lily, who sat curled up on the couch, watching everyone with cautious eyes. She gave a small nod, her gaze never leaving him. Jack pulled out the bread and cheese. "Grilled cheese okay?" Another tiny nod. He set to work, aware of her watching his every move. The familiar routine of cooking helped steady his hands. He wasn't used to feeling so off balance, so unsure of what to do. Fighting, he understood. Protecting territory made sense. But caring for a traumatized child? This was new territory. Soon, the smell of melting cheese filled the small cabin. Jack slid the golden brown sandwich onto a plate and cut it into small triangles. He carried it to the coffee table in front of Lily, setting it down alongside a glass of water. "Careful, it's hot," he warned gently. Lily stared at the food, but didn't move. "Go ahead," Jack encouraged. "It's for you." She reached out hesitantly, her thin fingers grabbing one of the triangles. Instead of eating it, she held it close to her chest, as if afraid it might be taken away. Jack felt something twist inside him. "No one's going to take it," he said softly. "It's all yours." Her eyes met his, searching for truth. Whatever she saw must have reassured her because she took a small bite. Then another, larger one. "Good, huh?" Jack asked with a slight smile. A hint of a smile touched her lips as she nodded. Jack sat on the floor across from her, giving her space while staying close. "My mom used to make these for me when I was about your age," he said, surprising himself with the personal detail. "Said there wasn't much that couldn't be fixed with a good grilled cheese." Lily took another bite, watching him with growing interest. "She was right about a lot of things," Jack continued, his voice taking on a gentler tone than his club brothers had ever heard. "Taught me how to tie my shoes, too. Took forever to learn." He demonstrated, unlacing and relacing his heavy boot with exaggerated movements. Lily's eyes followed his fingers. "You know how?" he asked. She shook her head, looking down at her own shoes, dirty sneakers with Velcro straps. "I could show you sometime," Jack offered. She finished her sandwich, each piece eaten carefully, methodically. When she reached for the water glass, her hands trembled slightly. Jack steadied the glass, helping her bring it to her lips. "Small sips," he instructed. "That's it." After she drank, Jack noticed a crumb on her chin. Without thinking, he reached out and gently brushed it away. She flinched at first, then relaxed under his careful touch. "Sorry," he murmured. They sat in silence for a moment, the afternoon light shifting around them. From outside came the low murmur of the other club members talking, the occasional rumble of a passing vehicle on the distant highway. "You're big," Lily said suddenly, her voice small but clear. Jack blinked in surprise. "Yeah, guess I am." "But not scary," she added, studying him with serious eyes. Something warm spread through Jack's chest. "Good to know." She hugged her knees to her chest, still watching him. "You're like a bear." "A bear?" Jack repeated, raising an eyebrow. She nodded, more confident now. "A big bear, but a nice one?" Jack felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. It wasn't the first time he'd been compared to a bear. Usually it was by people terrified of him, seeing only his size and strength as threatening. But the way Lily said it was different. "My bear," she said, so quietly he almost missed it. Jack was silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of those two simple words. In his 45 years, he'd been called many things, most of them not worth repeating. But my bear, spoken with trust instead of fear, was new. "Yeah," he finally said, his gruff voice softer than usual. "I guess I am." The late afternoon shadows stretched across the safe house as Jack prepared a warm bath for Lily. He'd found clean towels in a cabinet and had heated water on the stove, pouring it carefully into the old clawfoot tub that stood in the small bathroom. "Too hot?" he asked, testing the water with his elbow the way he vaguely remembered his mother doing when he was small. Lily stood in the doorway, clutching a faded t-shirt Mac had brought her from his truck. It hung like a dress on her tiny frame. "I'll be right outside if you need anything," Jack said, turning to leave. Lily's face clouded with fear, and she grabbed his hand. "Don't go." Jack hesitated. "You need privacy, little one." She shook her head firmly. "Please stay, Bear." The nickname made his heart twist. He nodded slowly. "All right. I'll turn around while you get in, okay?" He faced the wall, listening to the soft splash as Lily climbed into the tub. The bathroom was cramped, with peeling wallpaper and a single bulb dangling from the ceiling, but it was clean and warm. "I'm in," she said quietly. Jack turned back, pulling up a small stool beside the tub. He handed her a washcloth and soap, careful to give her as much independence as possible. "You tell me if you need help," he said. Lily nodded, dabbing at her arms with the soapy cloth. Her movements were slow, either from weakness or uncertainty. Jack watched, noticing how she favored her right arm, likely bruised from the chain that had held her. "Let me help with your hair?" he offered after a few minutes. After she nodded, he rolled up his sleeves, revealing tattooed forearms marked with faded ink and old scars. With unexpected gentleness, he cupped water in his large hands and poured it over her hair, careful to keep it from her eyes. "My sister had long hair," he said, working a small amount of shampoo into Lily's tangled locks. "Used to let me practice braiding it when we were kids." Lily relaxed slightly under his careful ministrations. "Where is she now?" Jack's hands paused briefly. "Gone. Long time now?" "Like my daddy," Lily whispered. Jack nodded, resuming his work. "Yeah, like that." He helped her rinse, supporting her back as she leaned backward into the water. That's when he noticed it, a thin leather cord around her neck, partially hidden by soap bubbles. It had been concealed beneath her dirty clothes and the grime on her skin. "What's this?" he asked, his finger gently touching the cord. Lily's hand flew to her neck, clutching the hidden item. "Mommy said never take it off. It's special." Jack nodded, understanding the importance of treasures. "Can I see? I won't take it, promise." Hesitantly, Lily released her grip. From beneath the water she pulled up a small, tarnished locket. It was oval-shaped, no bigger than a quarter, with delicate engravings nearly worn smooth by time and handling. "It's beautiful," Jack said. "Your mom gave you this?" Lily nodded. "For protection. It has magic." Jack smiled slightly at her childish certainty. "Magic, huh?" "It keeps me safe," she insisted, her eyes serious. "Mommy said the person inside watches over me." Jack's curiosity deepened. "May I?" he asked, holding out his hand. Lily thought for a moment, then nodded, leaning forward so he could examine the locket without removing it from her neck. The clasp was stiff, probably from water damage and years without opening. Jack used his thumbnail carefully, not wanting to break this precious item. Finally, with a small click, the locket opened. Inside, protected by a cloudy piece of plastic, was a faded photograph. Jack squinted to make it out in the dim bathroom light, expecting to see Lily's father, or perhaps her mother. Instead, he found himself staring at a face he knew intimately, his own. Much younger, maybe 20 years ago, with fewer lines and a defiant stare. His hair was shorter, his beard less gray, but unmistakably him. Jack's hands went still. The bathroom seemed to tilt around him as he stared at the impossible image. "That's you," Lily said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Bear." Jack couldn't speak. He sat frozen, the open locket in his hand, staring at a connection he couldn't begin to understand. Jack's mind raced as he stared at the worn photograph in the locket. His own face, younger but unmistakable, looked back at him from Lily's treasured possession. The bathroom suddenly felt too small, the air too thick to breathe properly. "Bear," Lily's small voice pulled him back to the present. "Are you okay?" He closed the locket gently and helped Lily finish her bath, his movements mechanical as his thoughts tumbled over each other. Once she was dried and dressed in the oversized t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants Mac had rolled up at the ankles, Jack settled her on the couch with a coloring book another club member had brought. "I'll be right over there," he said, pointing to the kitchen table just a few feet away. "Just need to think for a minute." Lily nodded, already focused on selecting the right crayon for her picture. Jack sank into a wooden chair, running his hands through his gray, streaked hair. The photograph couldn't have been taken more than 20 years ago. He could tell by the leather cut he'd been wearing, one he'd gotten when he first patched into the club. His mind sifted through foggy memories, trying to place the image in time. "When was that picture taken?" he muttered to himself, closing his eyes to concentrate. 20 years ago. He would have been around 25. Young, angry, full of fire. Those had been wild days. Bar fights, rival gang confrontations, long rides through territories they shouldn't have entered. He looked over at Lily, her small head bent over her coloring. 5, maybe 6 years old. The timing didn't make any sense. How could his photo end up in her locket? "Magic," she had said. Her protection. Jack poured himself a glass of water, his throat suddenly parched. The club had run rougher back then, before some of the older members had steered them toward more legitimate business. They'd been involved in plenty of situations he wasn't proud of. But also, a memory flashed. A rainy night outside a roadside bar in Millerville. The Hellfire Gang had been causing trouble, pushing into their territory. The Angels had gone to send a message. Jack froze, the glass halfway to his lips. The woman. He set the glass down with a thud, water sloshing over the side. That night had turned ugly fast. The Hellfires had a girl with them, barely 20, terrified, obviously not there by choice. When the fighting broke out, Jack had found her cowering in a back room. "Please," she'd begged, "don't hurt me. I just want to go home." Instead of leaving her there, he'd put her on his bike and driven her 30 miles to her sister's house in the pouring rain. She'd clung to him the whole way, sobbing against his back. Her name had been Anna. Anna Miller. Jack stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Lily looked up from her coloring, startled by the sudden noise. "It's okay," he reassured her. "Just remembered something." Anna had been so grateful, she'd insisted on taking his picture with an old camera she found at her sister's house. "So I never forget the man who saved me," she'd said. He hadn't thought anything of it at the time. Just a scared girl who'd gotten mixed up with the wrong crowd. He'd given her some cash, told her to stay away from the Hellfires, and ridden off into the night. Typical hero stuff, he'd thought with some embarrassment. But now... Jack looked at Lily, really looked at her. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her chin. Could Anna be her mother? The timing would make sense. If Anna had kept that photo, treasured it, and eventually placed it in a locket for her daughter. "Lily," he said softly, moving to sit beside her on the couch. "Your mommy, what's her name?" Lily looked up from her coloring book. "Mommy," she answered simply, as if it were obvious. Jack smiled, despite himself. "Yes, but what do other people call her? Like how people call me Jack, but you call me Bear." Lily thought for a moment, her forehead wrinkling with concentration. "Anna," she finally said, "but the bad man calls her Annie when he's mad." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. Anna, after all these years. The terrified young woman he'd rescued had somehow become connected to the Hellfires again, this time through a relationship with one of their members. And now her daughter sat beside him, carrying his image as a talisman of protection. Jack gathered the club members in the living room of the safe house. Lily had finally fallen asleep on the couch, her small body curled around a pillow, the locket still hanging from her neck. The 5 men stood in a loose circle, their large frames and leather cuts a stark contrast to the ordinary furnishings of the small cabin. "I need to tell you all something," Jack said, keeping his voice low to avoid waking the girl. He ran a hand over his beard, the words feeling strange in his mouth. "I think I know her mother." Mac raised his eyebrows. "Come again?" Jack pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down, suddenly feeling the weight of his 45 years. "That necklace she's wearing, it has a picture of me inside, from 20 years ago." "What the hell?" Duke whispered, glancing over at the sleeping child. "It was after that mess with the Hellfires at Jimbo's bar," Jack explained. "Remember that night, Mac? You were there." Mac's eyes widened with recognition. "The girl they had with them? The one you took home?" Jack nodded. "Anna Miller. I dropped her at her sister's place. She took my picture before I left. Said she wanted to remember the man who saved her." He gestured toward Lily. "And now her kid's wearing it in a locket." The men fell silent, processing the information. Outside, a light rain had started to fall, pattering softly against the windows. "So the mother, Anna, somehow ended up with a Hellfire again," Vince said, his voice gruff. "Full circle." "Must be that bastard who chained her daughter to a tree," Duke added, his hands clenching into fists. "Probably the club leader we've been hearing about, the one calling himself Razor." Jack nodded slowly. "Lily said her mom's name is Anna, and that the bad man calls her Annie when he's angry." He looked around at his brothers, his family. "This isn't just about helping a kid anymore. This is personal. Anna trusted me once to keep her safe, and somehow, even all these years later, she's still holding on to that memory. Gave it to her daughter for protection." "But it didn't protect her," Tommy, the youngest member, pointed out. "The girl still ended up chained to a tree." "No," Jack said, "but it led her to me again. What are the odds I'd be the one to find her? Of all the roads, all the places she could have been left?" He shook his head, still amazed by the coincidence. Mac placed a heavy hand on Jack's shoulder. "Some things don't happen by chance, brother. Some things are meant to be." Duke nodded in agreement. "The universe has a way of connecting the dots, even when we can't see the pattern." Jack looked at each of his brothers, gratitude welling in his chest. These men, tough as they were, understood what he was feeling without him having to explain it. "We need to find Anna," Vince said, determination hardening his features. "If this Razor guy did this to the kid, no telling what he might do to her mother." "I've got contacts in town who might know something about the Hellfire's movements," Tommy offered. "I can start asking around in the morning." "I'll check with our friends at the sheriff's department," Mac added. "See if there have been any reports filed about a missing girl or domestic disturbances involving the Hellfires." The men continued planning, their voices a low rumble of determination and purpose. Jack listened, occasionally adding his thoughts, but his eyes kept drifting back to Lily. The connection between them wasn't just chance. It was as if some invisible thread had been pulling them together across the years. "We protect our own," Duke said finally, summing up the group's feelings. "And whether she knows it or not, Anna's been part of our extended family since you helped her all those years ago, Jack. Her daughter, too." The others nodded in agreement, their expressions solemn and resolved. "Whatever it takes," Vince added. "We find the mother and make sure both of them are safe, and then we deal with whoever did this." As if sensing they were talking about her, Lily stirred in her sleep, her small hand reaching up to touch the locket around her neck. Jack moved to adjust the blanket over her shoulders, and her eyes fluttered open briefly. "Bear?" she murmured sleepily. "I'm here," he assured her. "Go back to sleep. You're safe." She drifted off again, secure in his promise. Jack turned back to his brothers, his resolve stronger than ever. "Let's find Anna," he said simply. The safe house came alive with purpose by midday. Jack watched as his brothers prepared to head out, each man checking his phone and tucking weapons discreetly into jackets and boots. They moved with the quiet efficiency of men who had worked together for years, needing few words to coordinate their efforts. "I'll stay with Lily," Jack told them, his voice low as he glanced toward the bedroom where she was napping. "She still gets scared when I'm not around." Mac nodded, zipping up his leather jacket. "Probably for the best. You're the only face she trusts right now." The men gathered in the small kitchen for a final briefing. Tommy, the youngest at 32, had already mapped out several locations on his phone where Hellfire members were known to gather. "Duke and the First will hit the Rusty Nail first," Tommy said, referring to a bar on the edge of town. "My cousin tends bar there. Says Hellfire guys have been coming in more often lately, throwing money around." Vince, a former military man with sharp eyes and a perpetual frown, checked his watch. "Mac and I will talk to Sheriff Wilson. He owes us after that business with his son last year." "Remember," Jack warned, "we're just gathering information. No confrontations." He looked each man in the eye. "We need to know exactly what we're dealing with before we make any moves." The men nodded in understanding. Despite their rough appearances, the tattoos, scars, and leather cuts marking them as Hell's Angels, they were disciplined and strategic. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about protecting a child and finding her mother. "Call if anything changes," Jack added as they headed for the door. "And watch your backs." After they left, the safe house fell quiet except for the occasional creaking of the old wooden floors. Jack made himself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the locket in his hand. He'd borrowed it from Lily while she slept, promising himself he'd return it before she woke. The photo inside was yellowed with age, a much younger version of himself, clean-shaven with fewer lines around his eyes, standing beside his bike. He barely recognized the man he'd been back then. Life had hardened him since. But looking at the picture, he remembered Anna's gratitude, her shy smile as she snapped the photo with a disposable camera. "What happened to you, Anna?" he whispered to the empty room. Hours passed slowly. Jack kept himself busy, cleaning the kitchen, checking on Lily, and preparing a simple dinner of spaghetti and meatballs. Lily helped, standing on a chair to stir the sauce, her small face serious with concentration. "My mom makes sketty too," she told him, carefully holding the wooden spoon. "Does she?" Jack asked gently. "Is it good like this?" Lily nodded. "But she puts cheese on top." "Well, we've got cheese," Jack said, opening the refrigerator. "We'll do it just like she does." These small moments were precious. Glimpses into the life Lily had before. Clues about Anna. Jack stored each one away, building a picture of the woman he was determined to find. The sun was setting when the rumble of motorcycles announced the return of his brothers. Jack felt tension rise in his shoulders as he met them at the door. They filed in, faces grim with new knowledge. Lily, sensing the change in atmosphere, pressed herself against Jack's leg, suddenly shy again. "What did you find?" Jack asked, keeping his voice calm for Lily's sake. Mac shook his head slightly. "Not here," he muttered, nodding toward the child. Jack understood. "Hey, Bear Cub," he said, using the nickname he'd given Lily earlier that day. "Why don't you go pick a movie for us to watch after dinner? The DVDs are in the cabinet under the TV." Once Lily was occupied in the living room, the men gathered in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones. "It's worse than we thought," Tommy said, his voice tight. "The stepfather isn't just some Hellfire member, he's their president. Goes by the name Razor." "Marcus Bellows," Vince added. "He took over the Hellfires 2 years ago and has been expanding their territory ever since, into drugs, gun running, you name it." Jack felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "And Anna?" "According to what we heard," Duke replied. "She met him at a bar where she was waitressing. Whirlwind romance. They got married 6 months ago. Sheriff Wilson says there have been domestic calls to their house," Mac continued. "But nothing ever sticks. Witnesses suddenly can't remember what they saw, and Anna refuses to press charges." Jack clenched his fists, imagining what Anna and Lily must have endured. "There's more," Tommy said hesitantly. "Bellows has been in a rage since yesterday. Put out word to all his guys that he's looking for a missing girl, his stepdaughter." "He's hunting for her," Duke concluded, his eyes darting toward the living room where Lily sat. "And from what we heard, he won't stop until he finds her." Jack watched his brothers leave the kitchen, each man carrying the weight of what they'd learned. The Hellfire's president. This complicated everything. He took a deep breath and joined Lily in the living room, where she sat cross-legged in front of the TV cabinet, carefully examining each DVD case. "Find anything good, Bear Cub?" he asked, keeping his voice light. She held up a worn copy of Finding Nemo. "This one has fish." "Good choice," Jack said, smiling despite his worry. "We'll watch it after dinner." While they ate spaghetti topped with extra cheese, just as her mother made it, Jack studied Lily's face. She seemed more relaxed now, the haunted look in her eyes less prominent. Her bruises were beginning to fade to yellow at the edges, but the chain marks around her ankle remained angry and red. After dinner, he helped her wash up, and they settled on the couch to watch the movie. Lily curled against his side, small fingers occasionally twisting the fringe of the throw blanket he'd placed over her. As the colorful fish swam across the screen, Jack gently placed the locket back around her neck. "I borrowed this to look at the picture," he explained when she touched it with surprise. "I hope that was okay." She nodded, clutching it tightly. "Mommy gave it to me, said it was my special secret." Jack's heart quickened. "Your mommy gave you that? With my picture inside?" "She said you were a good man," Lily whispered. "That you helped her once when she was scared." Jack turned slightly to face her, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. The movie continued playing in the background, providing comfortable noise. "Lily," he said gently, "I want to help your mommy again, but I need to find her. Do you know where she might be?" Lily's face clouded, and she looked down at her hands. "With the bad man." "Your stepfather?" Jack prompted carefully. She nodded, her lower lip trembling. "Do you remember where your house is? The place where you lived with your mom and him?" Lily seemed to retreat inward, her body tensing. Jack immediately backed off. "It's okay, you don't have to talk about it if it scares you." They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching as Marlin searched desperately for his son in the vast ocean. Lily seemed transfixed by the father's determination. "We had a blue door," she said suddenly. With numbers. 147. Jack tried not to react too eagerly. That's very helpful, Lily. Do you remember what your street was called? She shook her head. But there was a big tree out front, and... Her voice trailed off as she seemed to struggle with a memory. Take your time, Jack encouraged. A school, she said finally. I could see a school from my window, with a red playground. Jack nodded, filing away these details. Did you go to that school? No. Mommy taught me at home. She said it was safer. The implications of that statement made Jack's jaw tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. What about other places? Did your mommy go anywhere special? Maybe to work or visit friends? Lily twisted her fingers in the blanket. She works at the flower store, with the yellow awning. Her face brightened slightly. I help her water the plants sometimes. That's wonderful. Lily, do you remember the name of the flower store? Petal? Something. She frowned in concentration. Petal Palace, that's it. Jack smiled. You're doing great, Bear Cub. He paused, considering how to phrase his next question. When the bad man took you to the woods, do you remember how long you drove to get there? Lily's eyes grew distant. It was dark already. I counted songs on the radio. 5 songs. Then we stopped. And did you see anything else before you were in the woods? Any buildings or signs? We crossed a big bridge, she said, and there was a sign with a deer on it. These were significant clues. Jack made a mental note to tell the others. Is Mommy okay? Lily asked suddenly, her voice small and frightened. Jack chose his words carefully. I don't know, sweetheart, but my friends and I are going to find her and make sure she's safe, just like you're safe now. Tears welled in Lily's eyes. He hurts her too, when she tries to stop him from hurting me. Jack gently wiped a tear from her cheek. You're both very brave, and you've helped us a lot by telling me about the blue door and the flower shop. As the movie played on, Lily gradually relaxed against him again. Jack stroked her hair softly until her breathing deepened with sleep. Only then did he carefully extract himself and walk to the kitchen, where he found Tommy sitting at the table. I heard most of that, Tommy said quietly. It's enough to start with. Jack nodded. House number 147, near a school with a red playground, and she works at Petal Palace Flower Shop. There's only one Petal Palace in the county, Tommy replied, already typing on his phone. It's in Riverdale, about 15 miles south. For the first time since finding Lily, Jack felt a surge of hope. They had a starting point. They would find Anna. The night wrapped around the safe house like a protective blanket. Outside, crickets chirped their evening songs, and the occasional distant rumble of a motorcycle passing on the main road briefly disturbed the quiet. Inside, the small cabin had transformed into a fortress. Jack stood by the window, peering through a narrow gap in the curtains. The moonlight cast long shadows across the yard, but nothing moved except the gentle swaying of tree branches in the breeze. Behind him, Lily slept peacefully on the couch, her small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Perimeter's secure, Diesel whispered as he entered from the back door. His massive frame seemed too large for the small kitchen doorway. Despite his intimidating appearance, arms covered in tattoos and a thick beard that hid most of his face, he moved with surprising quietness. Tommy and Hawk are taking first watch outside. Jack nodded. Thanks, brother. Diesel glanced at the sleeping child. She looks better. Less scared. She's getting there, Jack agreed. Still has nightmares, though. The big man's face hardened. We'll find that piece of garbage stepfather. Make him pay. Jack rubbed his tired eyes. First, we find her mother, Anna. That name ring any bells yet? From your past? Some, Jack admitted. I've saved a few people over the years. Hazard of the life. He shrugged, not wanting to elaborate on the violence that sometimes followed their club. But I remember a woman about 7, 8 years back. Dark hair, scared eyes. Boyfriend was roughing her up at a gas station outside of Millerville. Diesel leaned against the wall. What did you do? What needed doing, Jack said simply. Gave her some cash, told her to run. Never knew what happened to her after. Until now, Diesel said, nodding toward Lily. The two men fell silent as Lily stirred in her sleep, her forehead creasing. Jack moved to her side immediately, his weathered hand gently stroking her hair until the tension left her face. You're good with her, Diesel observed. Jack didn't respond. The emotions swirling inside him were too complex, too raw to put into words. Instead, he asked, Guns secured? Everything's locked in the shed except what we're carrying. No weapons where she can see them. Good. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Outside, an owl hooted softly. I'll make coffee, Diesel said, moving toward the kitchen. Going to be a long night. Jack eased himself onto the edge of the couch beside Lily. Her small hand clutched the blanket he'd tucked around her, and the locket with his photo peeked out from beneath her collar. The sight of it still unsettled him. This connection across time. This strange twist of fate that had brought their lives together again. One by one, the other club members came through for their shifts. Cooter brought a map of the county, marking potential locations based on Lily's descriptions. Snake reported that their scouts had confirmed activity at the Hellfire's main clubhouse. Unusual for this time of night. They're looking for her, Snake said grimly. Word is the stepfather's offering a reward. Jack's jaw tightened. Double the guards. No one gets within a mile of this place without us knowing. Throughout these exchanges, Lily slept on, exhaustion from her ordeal still evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. When she whimpered in her sleep, Jack was there instantly, his rough hand engulfing her tiny one. It's okay, Bear Cub, he murmured. You're safe. Around 3 a.m, the safe house settled into watchful silence. Diesel and Snake took up positions outside, while Cooter dozed in the kitchen chair, his hand resting on his holstered gun. Jack remained by Lily's side, unable to leave her even as exhaustion pulled at him. In the dim light of the single lamp, he studied her face. She was so small, so fragile, and yet she had survived horrors no child should ever know. The chain marks around her ankle would heal, but the scars inside might never fade completely. I'll find your mom, he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. And I'll make sure nothing ever hurts either of you again. It was a promise made in the quiet dark, weighted with his full intention. Jack Burke, feared enforcer of the Iron Wolves chapter of the Hells Angels, placed his calloused hand gently over Lily's smaller one, and silently renewed his vow. He had failed to protect them once before, walking away after that brief encounter years ago. He wouldn't fail them again. Morning light crept through the curtains of the safe house, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Jack stood by the kitchen counter, a steaming mug of black coffee warming his hands. The night had passed without incident, but tension still gripped the air like a physical presence. We ready? Diesel asked, entering the room with his leather vest already on. Jack nodded. Bike's fueled up. Cooter's bringing the truck for backup. He glanced toward the small bedroom where Lily still slept. Snake will stay with her. They seemed to bond over those pancakes yesterday. Lily had taken to the youngest member of their club, giggling when he flipped pancakes in the air and made faces with the batter. Snake, despite his intimidating name, had a gentle way with the child that surprised everyone. She'll be safe here, Diesel confirmed. We've got Miguel and Hawk on perimeter duty all day. Nobody gets close. The rest of the club members began filtering into the kitchen. Cooter arrived with a detailed map spread across the table. Red circles marked 3 possible locations based on what they'd pieced together from Lily's fragmented descriptions. Kid mentioned a blue house with a broken fence, Cooter said, pointing to the first circle. That's over in Pinewood District. And she talked about hearing train whistles at night, added Hawk, a lean man with sharp eyes that earned him his nickname. That narrows it to these 2 areas near the rail yard. Jack studied the map, his weathered face set in concentration. Her mother worked somewhere with flowers in the name. Any ideas? Already checked, Diesel said. 3 places: Flower Basket downtown, Blooming Good in the mall, and Rose's Florals near the industrial park. Jack nodded. Split into teams. Cooter and I will take the Pinewood location and Rose's Florals. Diesel, you and Hawk check the rail yard spots and the other flower shops. What about the stepfather's crew? Cooter asked. The Hellfires could have eyes everywhere. Keep it low profile, Jack instructed. No colors, no patches. Just look like regular guys out for a ride. He glanced at their assembled group and almost smiled. Even without their Hell's Angels insignia, they were hardly inconspicuous with their tattoos and weathered faces. At least try. The men nodded, understanding the stakes. This wasn't club business in the usual sense. This was personal now, especially for Jack. Before leaving, Jack knelt beside Lily's bed. The girl was just waking up, rubbing sleepy eyes with small fists. Bear? She murmured, reaching for him. I'll be back soon, cub, he promised, his voice gentler than any of his brothers had ever heard it. Snake is going to stay with you. You like his pancakes, right? She nodded, a tiny smile appearing. With blueberries? You bet, he said, smoothing her tangled hair. I'm going to find your mom today. You remember what she looks like? Lily nodded solemnly. Pretty. Sad eyes. Like the sky when it's going to rain. Jack felt something twist in his chest. That's right. I'll find her. He left Lily with Snake, who was already planning an elaborate breakfast to keep her mind occupied. Outside, the morning air was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the heaviness of their mission. The men mounted their bikes with practiced ease. Engines growled to life, a sound that usually brought Jack comfort. Today, it just reminded him of the urgency of their task. They rode in formation down the rural roads, splitting at the highway junction. Jack and Cooter headed toward Pinewood District first, their bikes eating up the miles with steady purpose. The blue house was easy to spot, its paint peeling, and a chain-link fence sagging along the front yard. But a quick circle of the property confirmed it was abandoned. No signs of recent habitation, not even footprints in the dusty driveway. Nothing, Cooter said as they remounted their bikes. On to the flower shop? Jack nodded, his expression grim. 2 hours later, after a fruitless conversation with the elderly owner of Rose's Florals, they met up with Diesel and Hawk at a roadside diner. No luck at the flower places, Diesel reported, but we might have something at the rail yard. There's a row of houses along the back stretch, and one of them had some activity this morning. What kind of activity? Jack asked. Man matching our stepfather's description, Hawk said quietly. Leaving in a hurry, looked nervous. Jack's eyes hardened. Show me. They abandoned their coffee and rode out to the edge of town, where the railroad cut through like a steel scar. Behind the commercial buildings sat a row of dilapidated houses, most appearing abandoned. That one, Diesel pointed to a gray single-story with boards over one window. Blue door, just like the kid said. Jack studied the house from their vantage point behind a storage shed. The yard was overgrown, trash scattered across the patchy grass. A broken children's bicycle lay on its side near the steps, The sight made his stomach clench. "That's it," he said with absolute certainty. "That's where he kept them." Jack signaled to the others to cut their engines. The silence that followed felt heavy, broken only by the distant rumble of a freight train. "Cooter, circle around back," Jack instructed in a low voice. "Diesel, you're with me. Hawk, stay with the bikes. Be ready for a quick exit." The men nodded, moving with practiced coordination. Jack approached the house from the side, keeping low behind the sparse bushes. His heart pounded steadily in his chest, not from fear, but from focused determination. The windows were grimy, some covered with old newspaper instead of curtains. Jack peered through a small gap, waiting for his eyes to adjust to the dimness inside. The interior revealed a living room in disarray, empty bottles scattered across a coffee table, cigarette burns on a threadbare couch. What caught his attention were the small details that spoke volumes. A chain bolted to the wall in one corner, locks on the outside of an interior door, a broken picture frame with the glass removed. Signs of imprisonment, not home. He moved to another window, this one offering a view into a cramped kitchen. Dishes piled in the sink, some crusted with food days old. A women's coat hung on a hook by the back door, but the hook was nailed in place above a padlock. Someone wanted to make sure nobody used that exit unauthorized. Cooter appeared at the rear of the house, giving Jack a silent hand signal. Someone was inside. Jack nodded and continued his careful observation. Through a partially open bedroom door, he caught glimpses of women's clothing strewn across a bed. A hairbrush with blonde strands matching Lily's hair. A small bottle of perfume, the only item in the house that seemed to be treated with any care. Movement caught his eye. A woman entered the bedroom, her thin frame moving with nervous energy. Though he could only see her partially, Jack recognized something in her posture, a perpetual flinch, as if expecting a blow at any moment. She picked up the perfume bottle, held it briefly to her nose, then carefully returned it to its exact position. The precision of her movements told Jack everything he needed to know. This wasn't just tidying up. This was fear of consequences for disturbing anything. Jack signaled to Diesel, who moved around to watch the front while Jack joined Cooter at the back. "She's alone," Cooter whispered. "Saw her through the kitchen window. Looks scared, jumps at every sound." "Any signs of her being free to leave?" Jack asked. Cooter shook his head. "Doors have padlocks on the outside. Plus this." He pointed to a small device mounted above the back door. A simple alarm that would trigger if the door opened. They watched as the woman moved to the kitchen. Up close, Jack could see her more clearly now. Her face carried the same delicate features as Lily, but with hollowed cheeks and dark circles under vacant eyes. She moved mechanically, checking the locks on windows, straightening items on counters, erasing any signs of her own presence. When the phone rang, she startled violently, nearly dropping the glass she held. She answered it with trembling hands. "Yes, I'm here." Her voice barely carried through the window. "No, I haven't left. Yes, I checked all the locks. I know what happens if—" Her voice broke. "Please don't hurt her. I'll do anything." Jack's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough. This wasn't a willing participant in Lily's abuse. This was another victim. The woman hung up the phone and slumped against the wall, silent tears tracking down her face. She pulled something from her pocket, the match to Lily's necklace. Inside would be his picture, a connection to a moment of kindness in a life filled with cruelty. "That's her mother," Jack whispered, certainty filling his voice. "And she's as much a prisoner as Lily was." Cooter nodded grimly. "So what's the plan, boss?" Jack watched as the woman wiped away her tears and resumed her fearful routine of checking locks and straightening items. Every movement screamed of someone controlled through terror. "We're getting her out," Jack said. "But we need to be smart about it. That call means the stepfather is checking in. If she disappears, he'll know something's wrong." They retreated silently back to where Hawk waited with the bikes. Jack's expression was stone, but his eyes burned with renewed purpose. "We found her," he told Hawk, "and she's not with him by choice." The safe house hummed with tension as daylight faded. Jack stood at the window, watching the last streaks of orange disappear behind the trees. Behind him, the club members gathered around the kitchen table, their usual rowdy demeanor replaced by focused determination. "She's basically a prisoner in there," Jack explained, turning back to face his brothers. "That house is locked up tight. Padlocks on the outside of doors, window alarms. She's terrified, jumping at every sound." Diesel, the oldest member of the group, stroked his gray-flecked beard. "And you're sure she's Lily's mother?" "Without a doubt," Jack replied, his voice certain. "She has the same necklace as Lily's. And her face, it's like looking at Lily 20 years from now." The little girl was in the bedroom, having fallen asleep after dinner. Jack had read her a story about bears finding honey, which had made her giggle for the first time since he'd found her. Cooter spread out a rough sketch of the neighborhood on the table. "The stepfather's house is here," he pointed. "Based on what we've learned, he splits his time between this place and his gang's main compound, which is about 15 miles east." "What do we know about him?" asked Hawk, the youngest of the group. Diesel pulled out his phone. "His name is Ray Mendez. Runs a crew called the Black Vipers. They control most of the drug traffic on the east side. He's got a record. Assault, trafficking, intimidation. Nothing that stuck. Man's got connections." Jack leaned over the table. "He's not just a criminal. He's a monster. Who chains a child to a tree? Who keeps a woman locked up like she's property?" The men nodded grimly. They'd all seen darkness in their lives. But this was different. "So what's the play?" Hawk asked. "We can't just roll up and take him out. His crew would retaliate." Jack had been thinking about this all day. "We need to be smart. This isn't about starting a war between clubs. It's about getting Lily and her mother to safety and making sure they stay that way." Cooter tapped the map. "We could grab the mother now, bring her here." Jack shook his head. "If she disappears, he'll know something's wrong. We heard her on the phone. He checks in regularly. We need him to come to us, somewhere we control the situation." The men fell silent, considering the options. "What about using the mother as bait?" Diesel suggested. "Get her to lure him somewhere." "Too dangerous," Jack replied. "She's terrified of him. One wrong move and he'd hurt her. Besides, we need to make sure he can never threaten them again." Hawk leaned forward. "What if we go through official channels? Anonymous tip to the police about the child abuse." "With his connections?" Cooter scoffed. "He'd be out before the paperwork was done. And then he'd make them both disappear for good." Jack paced the small kitchen. "We need leverage. Something that makes him back off permanently." "Evidence," Diesel said suddenly. "If we could get enough dirt on him, documented, sealed, and ready to go to every law enforcement agency if anything happens to the girl or her mother." Jack nodded slowly. "That could work. But we'd need solid proof of his operation, his abuse, everything." "The mother might have information," Hawk suggested. "And Lily's drawings," Jack added, remembering the detailed pictures she'd made of buildings and symbols. "They might be more important than we realized." The men worked late into the night, piecing together a plan. They would make contact with the mother tomorrow, carefully, away from the house. Get her to understand they had Lily and wanted to help. Then gather whatever evidence they could to build a case against Mendez that was too strong to ignore. By midnight, they had the outline of a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it gave them a direction. The others turned in, spreading sleeping bags across the living room floor. Jack checked the locks one last time, then quietly opened the bedroom door where Lily slept. Moonlight spilled through the window, casting a soft glow over her small form. She clutched the teddy bear Hawk had bought her that afternoon, her breathing deep and even. Looking at her peaceful face, Jack felt a resolve settle in his chest like iron. Tomorrow would be dangerous. Their plan had 1,000 ways it could go wrong. But seeing Lily, safe for perhaps the first time in her young life, made every risk worthwhile. He would face whatever came. For her, for the woman he'd once helped and forgotten, for the family that fate had somehow placed in his path again. Jack quietly closed the door and prepared himself for what lay ahead. The sun broke over the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of gold and pink as the rumble of motorcycles filled the morning air. Jack led the way, his weathered face set in grim determination beneath his helmet. Behind him rode his brothers, Diesel, Cooter, Hawk, and 3 others who had arrived during the night. Their bikes moved in tight formation down the empty highway, a dark procession against the brightening day. Jack glanced in his mirror at the line of riders. These men had become his family after he'd lost everything else. Now they were risking their lives for a little girl he'd found by chance, or perhaps not by chance at all. The morning air was cool against his face as they rode. In his mind, he kept seeing Lily's face as he'd left her with Maria, the club treasurer's wife. The little girl had clung to him, her eyes wide with fear. "You're coming back, Bear?" she'd whispered. "I promise," he'd told her, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'll always come back for you." The memory strengthened his resolve. This wasn't just about confronting a rival gang leader anymore. This was about keeping a promise to someone who had finally learned to trust again. The bikes thundered over a bridge spanning a shallow river. Fields gave way to scattered houses, then to the outskirts of town where abandoned warehouses and run-down businesses lined the roads. This was the beginning of Mendez's territory, the domain of the Black Vipers. Diesel pulled alongside Jack at a red light, flipping up his visor. "You ready for this, brother?" Jack nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." The light changed, and they continued on. Their plan was dangerous but clear. Approach from different directions, gather evidence, make contact with Lily's mother if possible, and deliver their message to Mendez, a message that would ensure he never threatened Lily or her mother again. As they rode deeper into Viper territory, Jack noticed eyes tracking their movement. Men lounging outside corner stores, watching with hard expressions as the Hells Angels passed. A few spoke into phones. Word was spreading of their arrival. "They're calling it in," Cooter said through their helmet communicators. "We've got about 10 minutes before we have a welcoming committee." "Stick to the plan," Jack replied, his voice steady. "Remember, we're not here for a war. We're here for the girl." They split up at the next intersection as planned. Diesel and 2 others heading north to approach the compound from the rear, Hawk circling east to provide lookout, while Jack and Cooter continued straight toward the main entrance. The compound came into view as they crested a small hill, a former trucking depot surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Several buildings clustered inside, and Jack could make out at least 5 men patrolling the perimeter. Motorcycles and cars filled a lot to one side. They slowed their bikes, pulling into an abandoned gas station a quarter-mile from the entrance. From here, they had a clear view while remaining partially hidden behind the crumbling building. Cooter killed his engine and dismounted, pulling out a pair of binoculars. "I count 7 men outside. Probably more inside." Jack nodded, removing his helmet and running a hand through his gray-streaked hair. "Mendez's car there?" Cooter scanned the lot. "Black Escalade by the main building, that's his." Jack felt a cold determination settle in his chest. Somewhere in that compound was the man who had chained Lily to a tree and left her to die. the man who kept her mother prisoner in her own home. "Diesel, you in position?" Jack asked into his communicator. "Almost," came the reply. 2 minutes. "Hawk? I've got eyes on the east side. There's movement at the gate. I think they're expecting us." Jack checked his watch. It was just past 7 in the morning. "They know we're here, but they don't know why. That gives us an advantage." He unzipped his leather jacket, feeling the weight of the photos in his inside pocket. Images of Lily's injuries, her drawings of the compound, documents they'd gathered on Mendez's operation. These were their weapons today, more powerful than any gun. "Diesel's in position," the communicator crackled. "We're ready when you are." Jack and Cooter exchanged a look, the understanding of men who had faced danger together many times before. "Let's move," Jack said, putting his helmet back on. "Remember the plan? No weapons unless absolutely necessary. We get in, deliver the message, and get out." They kicked their bikes back to life and pulled out from behind the gas station, heading straight for the compound's main gate. The gates of the compound loomed before Jack and Cooter, heavy chain-link fencing topped with spirals of razor wire that glinted in the morning sun. 2 men stepped forward as they approached, hands resting on holstered weapons. Jack recognized the wariness in their eyes, the look of men prepared for violence but unsure if it was necessary. Jack cut his engine and dismounted, standing tall beside his bike. His weathered face remained calm despite the tension crackling in the air. From the corner of his eye, he could see Cooter taking position slightly behind him, watchful and ready. "We're here to see Mendez," Jack said, his voice carrying across the distance between them. "Just talk. No trouble." One of the guards spoke into a radio clipped to his shoulder, never taking his eyes off the visitors. After a moment, he nodded and waved them forward. "Weapons stay outside," he said gruffly. Jack raised his hand slightly. "Not here for a gunfight." The gates opened with a metallic groan, and Jack wheeled his bike through, Cooter following close behind. Inside, the compound buzzed with wary activity. Men moved between buildings, some pretending to work, others openly watching the newcomers. Jack counted at least 15, more than they'd anticipated, but not enough to change their plans. They parked their bikes near the main building, a concrete structure with few windows and a heavy metal door. The smell of oil and gasoline hung in the air, mixing with cigarette smoke and the unmistakable tension of men preparing for conflict. A tall figure appeared in the doorway. Mendez. Jack had never met him, but he'd seen photos, heard stories. The man was in his 40s, with close-cropped hair and a scar that pulled at the corner of his mouth, giving him a permanent sneer. He wore dark jeans and a black button-up shirt, sleeves rolled to reveal heavily tattooed forearms. "Didn't expect to see angels on my doorstep this morning," Mendez said, stepping forward. His voice carried a slight accent, his tone casual but underlined with menace. "Especially not you, Reynolds. Thought you were semi-retired these days." Jack met his gaze steadily. "Some things bring a man out of retirement." Mendez's eyes narrowed slightly. He gestured toward the building behind him. "Let's talk inside. Just you." Jack nodded to Cooter, who took up position near their bikes. The silent communication between them was clear. If Jack didn't return in 15 minutes, the plan would shift. Inside, the building was surprisingly well furnished. What looked run down from the outside concealed an office with expensive furniture and technology. Mendez led Jack to a room at the back, closing the door behind them. 2 more men stood against the wall, arms crossed. "So," Mendez said, settling into a leather chair behind a desk. "What brings Hell's Angels to my doorstep without an invitation?" Jack reached slowly into his jacket, noting how quickly the guards tensed. He pulled out a photograph and placed it on the desk, face up. It was an image of Lily in the safe house, her thin arms covered in bruises, chain marks visible around her ankle. Mendez glanced at the photo, his expression unchanging. "We found her chained to a tree," Jack said, his voice deceptively quiet. "Left to die. Your handiwork, I believe." Mendez leaned back in his chair, studying Jack. "The girl is my business, not yours." "She became my business when I cut her free," Jack replied. "She's under my protection now." A flicker of something, surprise, perhaps concern, passed across Mendez's face. "You should have left her where you found her. That girl, she's not what you think." Jack placed another photo on the desk, this one of the necklace with his picture inside. "I know exactly what she is. Her mother was someone I helped years ago. Now I'm helping her daughter." Mendez stood suddenly, turning to look out a small window. The guards shifted, but remained in place. "You think you know, but you don't," Mendez said, his voice lower now. "That child, she brings destruction wherever she goes." Jack frowned. "What are you talking about?" Mendez turned back, his eyes burning with what seemed like genuine fear. "She's cursed. I don't expect you to believe it, but I've seen it." "Cursed," Jack repeated flatly. "You chained a child to a tree because of some superstition?" "3 of my men died after crossing her path," Mendez said, tapping the desk with his finger. "Accidents, they said. But I knew. Every gang that tried to move against us after encountering her suffered. Equipment failures, arrests, mysterious illnesses." He leaned forward. "The day after she looked at me with those eyes of hers, my brother wrapped his car around a tree." Jack stared at the man, recognizing the twisted logic of genuine belief in his eyes. "You chained her up because you were afraid of a little girl?" "I chained her up to protect what's mine," Mendez hissed. "Her mother understands. She's seen it too. The girl doesn't mean to do it. She just brings bad luck like a storm brings rain. It follows her." Jack stared at Mendez, disgust written across his weathered face. The man's delusion was complete, believing a small child could carry some kind of curse. Behind the madness, though, Jack recognized something more dangerous, genuine conviction. "Where's her mother now?" Jack demanded, his voice low but forceful. Mendez shrugged, regaining some of his composure. "Safe. Away from the girl. It's better that way." The door behind them opened suddenly, and one of Mendez's men stepped in, his face tight with concern. "Boss, we've got a situation outside." Jack turned, immediately alert. Through the small window he could see movement in the yard. His club members had approached closer to the building, and tensions were rising between them and Mendez's men. "Looks like your friends are getting anxious," Mendez said, his hand sliding toward a drawer in his desk. "They're just making sure I walk out of here," Jack replied, stepping toward the door. "This doesn't have to get messy. I want the girl's mother, and I want you to stay away from both of them." Mendez laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "And I want the curse lifted from my business. Guess we both want impossible things." They moved outside, into the bright morning light that seemed at odds with the dark conversation they'd just had. The compound had transformed in the few minutes they'd been inside. Jack's brothers had edged closer, and Mendez's men had formed a loose line, hands hovering near weapons. And there, climbing out of Slash's truck parked just beyond the gate, was Lily. Jack's heart dropped. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be safe at the clubhouse with Doc and the others. "What the hell?" he muttered, immediately striding toward her. Slash raised his hands apologetically as their eyes met. "She wouldn't stop crying, man. Kept saying she needed to help Bear. We figured having her identify him might help our case." Before Jack could respond, Lily spotted him. Her small face lit up, and without hesitation she ducked under Slash's arm and slipped through the partially open gate. "Lily, stop!" Jack called out, but she was already running across the yard, her little legs carrying her straight toward him. Mendez froze, staring at the child as if he'd seen a ghost. "Keep her away," he hissed, backing up a step. Everything happened at once. Mendez reached for his weapon, his men tensed, hands moving to their sides. Jack's brothers stepped forward, ready for the fight that seemed inevitable. But Lily kept running, not toward Jack as he'd thought, but directly toward Mendez. The man's eyes widened with genuine fear, his gun half drawn. Jack lunged forward to intercept her, certain she was running toward danger. "Lily, stop!" But at the last moment, she changed direction. Instead of running to either man, she planted her small body directly in front of Jack, facing Mendez. Her arms spread wide, making herself as big as her tiny frame would allow. "Don't hurt Bear!" she shouted, her voice surprisingly strong for such a small child. "Don't hurt him!" The yard fell silent. Mendez stared at the girl, his weapon still half drawn, uncertainty crossing his face. Lily stood her ground, trembling but determined, shielding Jack with her body. The chain marks around her ankle were visible beneath her pant leg, a stark reminder of what this man had done to her. "She's protecting him," one of Mendez's men said, sounding confused. Jack gently placed his hands on Lily's shoulders, trying to move her behind him, but she refused to budge, her small body rigid with determination. "It's okay, Lily," he said softly. "I'm okay." "No," she insisted, looking up at Mendez with fierce eyes. "He's bad. He hurts people. He won't hurt Bear." Mendez's men exchanged glances. This was clearly not the cursed, malevolent child they'd been led to believe existed. This was simply a brave little girl protecting someone she cared about. Jack felt something powerful shift in the air around them. The moment when a lie, exposed to daylight, begins to crumble. The compound fell silent except for Lily's rapid breathing. Her small body remained planted firmly in front of Jack, arms spread wide like a shield. The chain marks around her ankles were visible to everyone, stark evidence of cruelty that couldn't be explained away. Mendez's men shifted uncomfortably, exchanging uneasy glances. This wasn't what they had been told. Their boss had described a dangerous child, someone who brought bad luck, someone who needed to be contained. Instead, they saw only a frightened little girl willing to protect someone she cared about. "Put the gun down, Mendez," Jack said quietly, his hand still resting protectively on Lily's shoulders. Mendez's jaw tightened, his weapon still half drawn. "You don't understand what she is." "What she is?" One of Mendez's lieutenants, a man called Rico, stepped forward with a confused expression. "She's a kid, man. Just a little kid." "She's not just a kid," Mendez snapped, his voice rising to a pitch that made several of his men flinch. "Every time she's around, things fall apart. Shipments get seized, deals collapse. She's bad luck. She's poison." Rico looked from his boss to the trembling girl, and back again. "You chained her up because you think she's bad luck?" "I did what was necessary," Mendez shouted, spittle flying from his mouth. His eyes had taken on a wild quality that hadn't been there before. "You've seen it yourself. Ever since my wife brought her into my house, everything started going wrong." Another of Mendez's men, a heavy-set man with tattoos covering his neck, took a step back. "Man, I thought you said she was dangerous. Like, actually dangerous." Mendez pointed his gun directly at Lily, his hand shaking visibly. "She is dangerous. She's the most dangerous thing I've ever seen." Jack tensed, ready to throw himself between Mendez and Lily, but he didn't need to. 3 of Mendez's own men moved forward, putting themselves between their boss and the child. "This ain't right," Rico said, shaking his head. "We don't hurt kids. That's never been who we are." "Get out of my way," Mendez screamed, his face contorting with rage. "All of you, she needs to be contained." The yard had become a powder keg. Mendez's remaining loyal men reached for their weapons, while others backed away, clearly wanting no part in threatening a child. Jack's brothers had moved closer, ready for whatever came next. "You said she was trying to sabotage us," another man spoke up, his voice heavy with accusation. "You said she was planting stuff, stealing information. Not that she was just bringing bad luck." "It's the same thing," Mendez insisted, his voice cracking. "She's a curse. Look at her. Look at her eyes." Lily pressed back against Jack's legs but didn't retreat. Her small hands had balled into fists. "Where's my mommy?" she demanded, her voice surprisingly steady. The simple question seemed to echo across the compound. It cut through Mendez's ravings, reminding everyone of the reality. This was about a little girl separated from her mother. "Yeah, where is her mother?" Rico asked, turning to Mendez with new suspicion in his eyes. "You said the woman was staying away by choice." Mendez's face twisted. "She is. She understands what her daughter is." "That's not what the mother told me when I found her locked in that back room," a new voice announced. One of Jack's brothers, Ricky, emerged from behind the main building, supporting a thin, exhausted-looking woman with a bruised face. "Mommy!" Lily cried out, finally breaking her defensive stance. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Lily! Oh my God, Lily!" Rico and several others stared at the scene in disbelief, then turned to Mendez with open disgust. "You locked up her mother too? You said she was staying with her sister in Phoenix?" "He's been lying to all of you," Jack said calmly, watching as Mendez's authority crumbled before his eyes. Two more men stepped away from Mendez, moving to stand with Rico. Another simply turned and walked towards the gate, shaking his head. "I'm out," he muttered. "This ain't what I signed up for." Mendez looked around wildly, seeing his support evaporate, his face contorted with rage and desperation. "You're all fools! She'll destroy everything we've built!" Rico slowly removed his jacket, the one bearing their gang's colors. "No, man. You already did that yourself." Jack watched as Mendez's authority crumbled in real time. The rival leader's eyes darted frantically from man to man, searching for allies, and finding none. This was the moment Jack had been waiting for. He caught Rico's eye and gave a small nod of respect. The man had chosen humanity over loyalty to a monster. Jack then glanced at his brothers, who instantly understood. They began moving with practiced precision, spreading out to secure the compound. "Lily," Jack said softly, kneeling beside her. "Go to your mom now." Lily hesitated only a second before rushing across the dirt yard toward her mother. Ricky helped the weakened woman kneel down to embrace her daughter. Their tearful reunion made even the toughest men in the yard look away, giving them a moment of privacy. With Lily safely away, Jack turned his attention back to Mendez. The man was backing away, his gun now pointed wildly at anyone who approached. "It's over," Jack said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Your men see you for what you are now." "This isn't over," Mendez snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. "I built this, all of this. They're nothing without me." Rico stepped forward, his hands empty and open. "Put the gun down, boss. There's no way out of this that ends well for you if you keep pointing that thing." Mendez's eyes narrowed, focusing on Rico with pure hatred. "Traitor," he spat. "I made you. You were nothing when I found you." "Maybe," Rico acknowledged with a shrug. "But at least I never chained up a kid." Those words seemed to snap something inside Mendez. With a howl of rage, he swung his gun toward Rico. Before he could pull the trigger, Jack lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. The gun discharged harmlessly into the air as both men hit the dirt hard. Jack's weight pinned Mendez down as he twisted the man's wrist until the gun clattered to the ground. One of Jack's brothers quickly kicked it away. "You're done," Jack growled, his knee pressing into Mendez's back as he secured the man's wrists. "No more hurting that girl or her mother." Mendez bucked and thrashed beneath him, But Jack held firm. He'd been waiting for this moment since he'd found Lily chained to that tree. Every chain mark on her ankles, every frightened look in her eyes had fueled his determination to end this man's control. "Get me some zip ties," Jack called out, and one of his brothers tossed him a pair. As he secured Mendez's wrists tightly behind his back, Jack leaned down close to the man's ear. "I want you to know something," he said quietly, so only Mendez could hear. "That girl you called cursed? She's your curse. Because of what you did to her, you've lost everything." Mendez stopped struggling for a moment, his breathing heavy and ragged. "You don't understand," he panted. "She'll ruin you too. Just wait." Jack pulled Mendez to his feet, looking directly into his wild eyes. "The only curse here was you." Two of Jack's brothers took hold of Mendez's arms. Rico approached, his face grim but determined. "We'll handle him from here," Rico said. "Turn him over to the police ourselves. Make sure he answers for everything." Jack studied Rico carefully. "You sure about that?" Rico nodded. "Yeah, we need to clean our own house. Show everyone we don't stand for this." He glanced toward where Lily and her mother were still embracing. "Some lines you don't cross." Jack considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. But if he somehow walks—" "He won't," Rico promised. "Too many witnesses now. Too many of us ready to testify about what we've seen." Mendez was still ranting as his former men dragged him toward a waiting truck. His words had lost their power, becoming nothing more than the desperate shouts of a man watching his empire collapse. Jack walked over to where Lily and her mother clung to each other. He knelt down beside them, his weathered face softening. "It's over," he said gently. "He can't hurt either of you anymore." Lily looked up at him, her small face streaked with tears but her eyes clear and unafraid for the first time since he'd found her. "Thank you, Bear," she whispered. The morning sun cast long shadows across the compound as Jack watched Mendez being loaded into the back of Rico's truck. The man continued shouting threats and curses, but his words carried no weight anymore. The spell of fear he had cast over everyone had been broken. Jack turned his attention back to Lily and her mother. The woman looked frail, her body thin from stress and fear. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands trembled as they held her daughter. But there was strength there too, the kind that comes from surviving impossible things. "We need to get you both somewhere safe," Jack said, his gruff voice gentler than usual. The woman looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief and hope. "You're really him, aren't you?" she whispered. "The man from the photograph." Jack nodded slowly. "Seems that way, though that was a long time ago." Lily's mother clutched her daughter tighter. "I never forgot. Not for a single day." His brothers had secured the area, and it was time to leave. Blade approached, his leather vest creaking as he knelt down beside them. "Jack, we should move out. Police will be here soon with Rico's crew turning Mendez in." Jack nodded and turned to Lily's mother. "Can you walk?" She tried to stand, but swayed dangerously. Without hesitation, Jack scooped her up in his arms, the same way he had carried Lily that first night. Lily walked beside them, her small hand clutching the edge of Jack's leather vest. "My name is Sarah," the woman said quietly, as Jack carried her toward the waiting motorcycles. "Jack," he replied simply. They made their way across the yard, past the remaining members of Mendez's crew who stood in stunned silence. The world they'd known had collapsed in minutes, leaving them unmoored and uncertain. Blade had brought a truck for the journey back, knowing they couldn't transport Sarah and Lily safely on motorcycles. Jack carefully placed Sarah in the passenger seat before helping Lily climb into the back. He hesitated, then joined Lily while Blade took the wheel. As they drove away from the compound, Sarah turned in her seat to look at her daughter. Tears streamed down her face as she reached a trembling hand toward Lily. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Lily took her mother's hand, her small fingers wrapping around Sarah's. "It's okay, Mommy. Bear saved us." Sarah's gaze shifted to Jack, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and shame. "I was too afraid," she said. "I thought if I just did what he wanted, if I just kept quiet and didn't make him angry." Her voice trailed off. "Fear does things to people," Jack said quietly. "Makes them believe lies." The truck bumped along the dirt road, following the procession of motorcycles ahead of them. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled light across their faces. Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks. When he found out about the necklace, about the picture inside, he became obsessed. Said it proved I had connections to his enemies. She closed her eyes, the memory clearly painful. That's when everything got worse. Jack nodded silently, understanding more than he let on. Beside him, Lily leaned against his arm, her small body finally relaxed. "I tried to protect her," Sarah continued. "I really did. But when he chained her up..." Her voice broke completely then, and she doubled over, sobbing uncontrollably. "My baby, my little girl." Blade glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes meeting Jack's. There was understanding there. Some wounds would take a long time to heal. When Sarah finally straightened, her face was transformed. Through her tears, a fierce determination had taken hold. She reached back again, this time taking Jack's rough hand in hers. "Thank you," she said, her voice strong despite her tears. "Thank you for saving her when I couldn't. Thank you for finding her. For being the man I always believed you were." Jack squeezed her hand gently, uncomfortable with the praise but accepting it nonetheless. "Thank you for saving us both," Sarah whispered. The truck pulled up to the safe house, just as dusk painted the sky in shades of purple and orange. The rest of the club's motorcycles lined up beside it, engines falling silent one by one. Jack stepped out first, then helped Lily down from the back seat while Blade assisted Sarah, whose legs still wobbled beneath her. "Easy now," Jack said, his voice low and steady, as he led them toward the modest cabin that had become their sanctuary over these past few days. Lily walked between them, one hand in her mother's, the other clutching the edge of Jack's vest, unwilling to let either of them out of her reach. The little group moved slowly up the gravel path, their shadows stretching long behind them in the fading light. Inside, the safe house looked different somehow. What had been a temporary shelter now felt like something more. The other club members moved around with purpose. Doc was in the kitchen, pulling together what food they had, while Rico and Twitch straightened up the living area, clearing away maps and empty coffee cups. "We'll make up the spare bedroom for you both," Rico said, nodding toward Sarah and Lily. The tall, tattooed man had a gentleness about him that seemed at odds with his intimidating appearance. "Fresh sheets and everything." Sarah nodded, clearly overwhelmed. "Thank you," she whispered, looking around at these rough men who had risked everything to save her daughter. To save her. Jack guided them to the worn couch in the center of the room. Sarah sank into it gratefully, her hand never leaving Lily's. The girl climbed up beside her mother but kept glancing back at Jack, as though making sure he wasn't going to disappear. "You're safe now," Jack said, his weathered face softening as he looked at them both. "Nobody's going to hurt either of you again." Lily nodded solemnly. "Because of Bear," she said, turning to her mother with complete confidence. "He's strong." Sarah brushed her daughter's hair back from her face, tracing the fading bruises with gentle fingers. "Yes, he is," she agreed, her eyes meeting Jack's over Lily's head. The strongest. Doc emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray with mugs of hot chocolate and a plate of sandwiches. "Nothing fancy," he said, setting it down on the coffee table. "But it's hot, and it'll fill you up." Lily's eyes widened at the sight of the hot chocolate topped with tiny marshmallows. For the first time since they'd found her, she looked like what she was. A little girl, not a survivor of unspeakable cruelty. "Thank you," Sarah said, helping Lily take a careful sip from her mug. The room settled into a comfortable quiet as the club members moved around them, some stepping outside to smoke, others taking seats nearby, all of them keeping a watchful eye on their newest charges. The sound of gentle rain began pattering on the roof, turning the safe house into a cocoon of warmth against the gathering darkness outside. Jack returned from the kitchen with a plate of his own and settled into the armchair across from them. Lily watched him for a moment, then carefully climbed down from beside her mother, mug in hand, and walked over to Jack. Without a word, she climbed up beside him in the oversized chair, fitting herself against his side as though she belonged there. Jack froze for a second, then carefully shifted to make room for her, his large hand coming to rest protectively on her small shoulder. Sarah watched them, fresh tears welling in her eyes, but these were different tears, healing ones. "I think she's adopted you," Blade said quietly, a rare smile crossing his face. The club members gathered around them, sharing the simple meal together as night fell completely outside. Stories were told in soft voices, laughter occasionally breaking the quiet. Lily remained beside Jack, her small body gradually relaxing as exhaustion overtook her. But she refused to fall asleep, determined to stay in this moment where everything felt right and safe. Jack looked down at the girl beside him, then across at her mother, who was finally beginning to show signs of color returning to her face. Something long dormant stirred in his chest. Something he thought had died years ago. "You both can stay as long as you need," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "We've got plenty of room." Morning sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of the safe house, casting golden rectangles across the worn wooden floor. Jack sat at the kitchen table, a steaming mug of black coffee warming his calloused hands. The house was quiet. Most of the club members had left to handle club business, giving the new arrivals space to rest and recover. He heard soft footsteps and looked up to see Sarah entering the kitchen. Her hair was damp from a shower, and she wore borrowed clothes that hung loosely on her thin frame. Despite this, there was a newfound steadiness in her movements that hadn't been there yesterday. "Coffee?" Jack offered, gesturing to the pot on the counter. Sarah nodded gratefully. "Please." She poured herself a cup and added a generous amount of sugar before joining him at the table. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the only sound the occasional chirp of birds outside. "Lily's still sleeping," Sarah said finally. "First time she's slept through the night in I don't know how long." She wrapped her hands around her mug, drawing comfort from its warmth. "She feels safe here." Jack nodded, studying her face. The bruises were still visible, but there was something else there now, a spark that had been missing when they'd first brought her to the safe house. "You saved her," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Both times." She glanced up, meeting his eyes. "The necklace, she never takes it off. I told her you were her guardian angel." Jack shifted uncomfortably at the term. "I'm no angel," he said gruffly. A faint smile touched Sarah's lips. "Maybe not. But you were there when we needed one." She traced the rim of her mug with her finger. "That day, years ago, when those men cornered me behind the diner, I never got to thank you properly." "No need," Jack replied. "Some things you just do because they're right." Sarah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I named her Lily because of the tattoo on your arm," she admitted. I saw it when you pulled those men off me. Lilies for strength. Jack glanced down at the faded flowers inked into his forearm, a tribute to his mother who had passed years ago. I didn't know, he said softly. They fell silent again, both aware of the strange threads of fate that had connected their lives across the years. What happens now? Sarah asked finally, her voice uncertain. We can't go back to our apartment. He'll have people watching it. Jack had been thinking about this all night, weighing options and possibilities. You don't have to decide anything right now, he said. You're both safe here for as long as you need. Sarah set her cup down and looked at him directly. I need to know what you want, Jack. After everything you've done, I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to get back to your normal life. We're not your responsibility. Jack considered her words carefully. My normal life, he repeated thoughtfully. Truth is, I haven't had much of a life these past few years. Just the road and the club. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the trees surrounding the safe house. The thing is, he continued, having you both here this past week, it's the first time in a long time that anything's felt right. Sarah watched him, waiting. Jack turned back to her. I'm not offering out of obligation, Sarah. I want you both to stay. Not as some burden I'm carrying, but as family. The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. The club's got properties scattered across 3 states, places where you and Lily could start fresh. We'd be close enough to look out for you, but you'd have your own space, your own lives. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. You mean that? Jack nodded. The club's voted on it already. You've both got a place with us if you want it. He returned to the table, his expression earnest. Not because we pity you, because you're already part of us now. Outside the kitchen doorway, unseen by